couple of days ago, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made the most basic mistake you can make in Washington. She said what she really thinks. In a fact sheet describing her proposed Green New Deal, Ocasio-Cortez's office wrote that her plan would send federal money to people who were, quote, unwilling to work. Now, that line drew some notice and some criticism, though in fact it's not entirely shocking. Sending tax dollars to people who don't feel like working has been a central tenet of the Democratic program for a long time. But there's a difference between supporting something and stating it clearly out loud. And that was Ocasio-Cortez's sin. She said it out loud. Shh, said her superiors in the party, and Democrats immediately began pretending that it never happened. Fast forward to last Friday, we interviewed a man called Robert Hockett. He's been advising Ocasio-Cortez on the Green New Deal. Now, Hockett is a professor who occupies an endowed chair at Cornell Law School. Even if you're not overly impressed by credentials, and we're definitely not, that seemed like a reasonable job description, like he'd be a legitimate person. He's an Ivy League law professor. He must be sort of serious, not the kind of guy who would tell obvious lies on live television. That was our thinking anyway. So we asked him, why is the U.S. government thinking about, or one of the members of Congress are pushing, taxpayers to send money to people who don't want to work? And here was his response.
We never would, right? And AOC has never said anything like that, right? I think you're referring to some sort of document that some doctored document that somebody other than us has been circulating. No, I'm not embarrassed. It's just not us. Document, it's not embarrassing. No, Tucker. No, Tucker. No. We're not embarrassed by what's not ours. No, Tucker. We're not embarrassed by what's not ours. Okay. We want to clarify that it's not ours.
And we did get to the bottom of it. So in case that exchange confused you, the professor's position was simple. Ocasio-Cortez never suggested the government ought to pay people who won't work. That's just absurd. Another right-wing lie. Well, various progressive news organizations, with the air quotes right, and picked up that interview. See, they said, Fox News got fact-checked. Even Ocasio-Cortez herself suggested as much on Twitter. The only problem, Professor Hockett was lying. So was Ocasio-Cortez. She has indeed called for subsidies to those, quote, unwilling to work. We did not make that up. We didn't make any of it up, including the part about banning fossil fuels in 12 years. Ocasio-Cortez said that, too. So go back to another exchange we had with the professor. Here it is.
There's nothing about getting rid of anything. It's about expanding menu options, right? I mean, there are many, many things we want to be able to do now in addition to what we already do. So where's the airplane disappearance coming from? I'm not really clear on where that originates.
Well, so what you're saying is right? We're not getting rid of fossil fuels, actually, even though you just said we were. Because
no, we're rendering them obsolete for most purposes that they're used for now, right?
But air travel is a huge source,
hence the word most.
Well, Ocasio-Cortez's staff has since removed the fact sheet entirely from our office website, and they're telling the rest of us to read the actual resolution. It's like a scavenger hunt. Okay, so we did that. We read the actual resolution, and it turns out there's no substantive difference between the two. Ocasio-Cortez's resolution, the official one, which is right here, guarantees economic security to, quote, all the people of the United States, end quote, whether they want to work or not. It also calls for free education and rebuilding, quote, all existing buildings in the country, and a lot of other things. Now, under normal circumstances, sober people would laugh at a proposal like this. It doesn't even make sense. They would also, by the way, question Ocasio-Cortez's fitness for moral judgment of any kind. Keep in mind that she won her primary in New York with an openly racist campaign. Openly racist. She attacked her opponent for the color of his skin. That's the definition of a racist campaign. But whatever. Ocasio-Cortez has 3 million Twitter followers now. Democrats have to take her seriously. Watch poor Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, over the weekend, pretend these ideas make imminent sense.
I think it's absolutely realistic, and I frankly think we need to set our sights high. I think there were a lot of people who said that it wasn't realistic for the United States to get a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s when President Kennedy initially outlined that goal, but we did it.
Realistic. Is that really the word? Rashad Richey is the Liberal radio host and a former political director for the Democratic Party in the state of Georgia, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Richey, thanks very much for coming on. So it's pretty clear, it's not pretty clear, it's absolutely clear that Ocasio-Cortez's office said this, that the Green New Deal ought to provide for people whether or not they're willing to work. Why did they lie about it? Why not just say this is what we believe?
I think a mistake happened here, Tucker, and you're not telling the full story. The full story, according to reports from her office and others, is that this was a published document. The professor was wrong. It was not a fraudulent document, but it was a published document that should have never been out there. And they retracted the document immediately. Also, major presidential candidates, they have not endorsed that provision in the document. They've said, basically, hey, we didn't know about that part. We're not endorsing that part. And this is the Green New Deal, not the Green New Bill. This is not a policy. This is more so of a conversation starter, not a bill or a law proposal.
Well, I mean, part of what you said, I think, is absolutely right. It's a conversation starter, which, by the way, I appreciate. I mean, I like conversations, even if they're far out. I don't know why they're trying to run from the conversation, which is what they're doing. So here's what the new version that her office has referred us to and said, you've got to pay attention to this. It says that it will provide all the people of the United States with high quality health care, adequate housing, economic security, clean water. I mean, there's no caveat in there that you would have to work for what you get. People who are unwilling to work would get the same. So they're endorsing the same idea. So I'm missing it here. What we said was
I don't
right.
see that, Tucker. Yeah, first of all, I would tell them or challenge them to define economic security. I don't take the terminology economic security to mean that if you don't work, you still get paid the same salary as somebody who does work. I would say, first off, let's define what economic security actually means, because you may have a different standard or definition than I would have.
Well,
so
sure.
that term needs to be explored.
Okay, but it's money from the government. You're getting money from the government even if you don't feel like working. And I think even, for example, under the original New Deal, FDR, who no one thought was a right-winger, you didn't get anything for nothing. I mean, the Civilian Conservation Corps people worked for the money they got. WPA, same thing. I mean, FDR believed that there ought to be a direct relationship between work and reward, and that it was decadent and destructive to give people stuff for nothing. But Ocasio-Cortez does not think that.
Yeah, this is a small provision or a small part of this proposal.
Okay.
I personally believe if you don't work, you don't eat. Now, we're talking about folks that are able, folks that have the ability, folks that have the means to do so. So I agree with you on that point. So I concede to that. But at the same time, Tucker, the terminology economic security must be defined before we can properly debate it.
Oh, okay. So let me ask you this. They're touchy on the question of eliminating fossil fuels, because that is radical. And obviously the energy sector is the strongest part of our economy. It's 10 million jobs at least. And if you got rid of that overnight, it would be really disruptive. It would make the country poor, actually. So here's Ocasio-Cortez. Quote, there's no debate as to whether we should continue producing fossil fuels. There's no debate. We should not, she said. That's pretty clear. She said that in October. Why are they running from that?
They shouldn't run from it. I think it's a good conversation to have. Here's the bottom line, Tucker. Fossil fuels burned creates carbon. Carbon is bad. Carbon is bad for the atmosphere, it's bad for the water, and it's bad for our breathing. Every single scientist on this planet would agree. So any conversation that suggests an implementation to lower actual carbon emissions is a good conversation to have. There is no mistaking that she, Congresswoman Cortez, represents a more progressive wing of the Democratic movement. But it is a legitimate conversation when we're discussing environment.
I'm sorry to get the last word, but I don't think it's progressive to tell me I can't have cars and airplanes. It sounds like medieval.
I don't think that's not what's being said here, Tucker.
Okay.
That you can't have cars and airplanes. Understand, it is a conversation starter.
All right. Thank you. Rashad, I appreciate it.
Thank you.